afternoon, everybody. My name is Trina Shanks. I'm Director of Community Engagement for the University of Michigan School of Social Work. And I just want to give a little background about these calls and what they're for. They were initially intended to be an opportunity to let students and the social work community become more aware of volunteer opportunities in Detroit and Washtenaw County and kind of Southeast Michigan. And to also have a process for where students who weren't able to get all their field hours in to be able to complete field hours through some of these virtual conversations and volunteer opportunities. I'd like to introduce my engaged team. This includes Fatima Salman, Aisha Ghazi, and Sonia Harb. Dominique Crump has been helping as well. And then Dan Fisher and his team with the Office of Field Education has been coordinating with our team to kind of get these calls up and going, and also a process up and going to make sure people have what they need to get field credits for the work they're doing. And today, for our agenda, Dan from the field office will offer a brief discussion and debrief about what's happening with field, and maybe open up for questions and answers about what might happen going forward. We have a wonderful guest speaker, Richard Mui, who is board president of APIAVote-Michigan. And then we have two students who will also be joining us toward the end. And then Dominique Crump will do a self-care. And then we'll have closing remarks and reminder of all the different forms and all the different processes. But just for those who are joining for the first time, we have a document that has a list of all volunteer opportunities, most of them virtual, but some of them in person. And a process for if you do those volunteer hours, you need to communicate with your field's social work faculty to get credit for it. So at this point, I'm actually gonna pass, one more thing I'd like to say is, even though it started out just as a way to make sure that we have field opportunities for those who couldn't get all their hours in virtually, we also are kind of evolving to have really good conversations, hopefully with student engagement, with community volunteers or community partners, to kind of talk about what responding during this COVID pandemic times or times of emergency might mean, and how we can use it to encourage and learn from one another. So in addition to kind of the practical ways of getting field credits done, also kind of evolving to having a conversation amongst ourselves about what we need to be doing as a social work community going forward. So that we'll continue that tradition today. The first two sessions were mostly about connecting the field. We had a great guest speaker, Deepa Iyer, who talked about different ways people respond during times of crisis. Last week, we went again to having it mostly student-centered, but had a great conversation with two students who talked about how they brought their personal identity to the volunteering and the work they're doing during this time of pandemic. And so hopefully those kind of engaged conversations will continue. But at this moment, I'm going to pass it over to Dan Fisher, who is Director of Field Education for the school, to talk more about your questions and about what's happening with field. So Dan, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Trina. We're excited to have you all join us today. I wanted to take a little bit of time just to kind of update you about some reminders for spring, summer term related to field, and then talk with you a little bit more about what we think might be happening in the fall, what we're trying to anticipate and look forward to. But also, along with what Trina said about having you think a little bit about what impact COVID-19 is having on your communities that you're in, the communities where you're doing your field work. We're seeing an amazing, I think, response that people are really trying to adjust to what is a new world for all of us. And so we'll open it up to have some discussion about that, of what you all are seeing on your end of it as students. A couple of reminders for spring, summer term. So the paperwork process that we have every single term is in place again. So placement verification forms for what you'll be doing this summer are due on May 20th. So just be mindful of that. Please reach out to your individual field faculty if you have questions about that. Our online educational agreement then, for those of you that are doing the standard educational agreement that we've had in place, that'll open up after you complete your placement verification form, and you can begin to fill in assignments. Again, we know that a lot of them are remote right now. There probably is going to be some opportunity, we hope, maybe for people to move back on site if they're able to do that and want to be able to do that as the summer goes on, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. For those of you, if anybody is on the call that's part of the pilot for the new online educational agreement that we're rolling out in connection with the new curriculum, we run into a technological issue that we have to try to address related to the fact that you're now in your advanced field, which means that you're attached with your current concentration, which for those of you in the pilot would be IP, either mental health, IP children and youth, or IP community and social systems. Either way, you're in the IP group. The issue that we're running into has to do with our database system only connects the advanced new OEA to the pathways. So we have to figure out a way within the database to kind of put you in the IP pathway and not have it really conflict with your current concentration that you're in. So we're working on that over the next couple of weeks. So it may not be available for you to access right now, but we'll be reaching out to you and let you know when we get that bug worked out. We're hoping that it'll have absolutely no impact on you all whatsoever. We're just trying to deal with it from a behind the scenes kind of technology team and our database system. One of the other things that we've been doing through the field office for the last couple of years is in the semesters where you finished field seminar. So in your advanced field semesters, we've offered what we've referred to as field connections. These have usually been opportunities for small group get-togethers with your individual field faculty over the course of the semester. In the past, that we've always been able to do them in person and to have them available where people come to our conference room and OFE and meet with their field faculty. Students have given us really good feedback. They find that it's been very helpful to kind of problem solve field related issues or talk about things that are happening in field with their field liaisons and with their peers. We will continue those virtually over the summer. And in fact, we may actually, we're trying to figure out a way that we can actually increase the frequency of them. One of the things that we're planning, I think, looking forward about thinking that remote activities may be continuing to some degree in field through the fall and even the winter, is how to use these as almost like field labs where we can provide some additional field instruction and supervision to take some of the burden off of your field agencies, but also to make sure that we have a solid connection with you as well. One of the nice things is that these count as field hours. So your time that you would spend with the field faculty will be things that you should make sure that you keep track of and count toward field hours through the end of the term. The other thing, I know that Trina has said often about these volunteer experiences. We've been working with students to try to really create as many valuable remote learning opportunities as we can. And we know that sometimes these involve things that might be outside of your agencies, especially if they can't provide enough time. But remember, the field sites, we hope, are still the primary learning spaces that you're involved in. We want you to expand beyond that for your own learning. But keep in mind to address the things that are going on within your agencies as well. I've been pleasantly pleased and surprised at how quickly agencies are working to try to adapt to remote support for their communities that they're working in. Telehealth and telecommunication and support phone calls, things along that line have become commonplace. And in fact, we've had many agencies that, in anticipation of students starting field in the fall, that have been reaching out to us to let us know, hey, we have needs and we have opportunity for students to be able to engage in learning here. So at least right now, we've been excited to see that there seems to be good possibilities for things happening not only over the summer, but as we move into the fall term as well. So on the next slide, I think a couple things that I wanted to bring up for discussion, or at least just some information, is and I'm hopeful that all of you are thinking about what field might look like when the stay-at-home order, executive order from the governor gets lifted. or gets changed to the point that we have more of an opportunity to decide whether we're going to get out and leave our homes. Prior to the order, we had a process that we created within the field office where students, if agencies were open and sites were open, that students, based on their own health, their own feelings about safety, the safety within the organization and the agency, could make a decision in discussion with their field instructor and field faculty, if need be, about whether they felt comfortable going back to on-site work. We plan to re-implement that when the time is available. One of the things that I want to reiterate that was in our original email, although I think some people misread it, it is a decision that people are going to be making individually. I think that Trina, Professor Shanks can comment on this. We've been talking about the fall, and if we come back as residential, there still will be faculty and staff that, for their own health reasons, for their own safety reasons, are going to have to make professional decisions about whether they can come back on site. You all will have the same opportunity. Part of what I'm thinking about is if you've moved home and you live in California, it would make absolutely no sense for you to come back to Michigan to do 6 weeks of on-site field placement. We will work with you to continue with remote activities, to be able to do things through telehealth and things along that line. But we also know we have a number of students that really do want to be able to get back on site if they can. So there'll be a mechanism to allow for that. One of the things that we're discussing as an office is to make sure that the agencies, if they do open back up and they're asking and have availability for students to come back to do their field work on site, to make sure that they have adequate health and safety plans in place, to know what those are, to make sure that they're following social distancing guidelines, the things that have been laid out by the governor and will continue to be laid out. We want to make sure that they have appropriate plans in place. So that'll be something that we'll be communicating with you all as that time draws near. We're hopeful for those of you that want to be able to get back to your agencies that may happen sometime over the summer. We just don't know, but we're trying to plan for that. Keep in mind, if you do not feel comfortable going back on site, if you don't live here now and you can't go back on site, if you have health and safety reasons that you don't want to go back on site, or if you just feel uneasy about it, you do not have to. We're going to be working with you and with the agencies to make sure that we develop plans to allow you to continue your field education experience remotely if that fits for you individually, even if things open back up. I'm guessing as we think about the fall in field, we've been talking a lot about what the university is going to look like. My guess is we're going to see some combination of potentially residential teaching and education, as well as remote and online activities. And that will stay the same, I think, for field. I want to assure folks that students that, for health reasons and related to the virus, who ultimately don't feel that they can be as free as coming out and engaging with clients and community in agencies, or the safety protocols don't feel appropriate, we will have plans in place for folks to be able to continue remote work. A couple of other things that we'll be addressing too. The Council on Social Work Education is continuing to evaluate field hours and what that requirement would be. As many of you know, they submitted or allowed for an hours reduction through December of 2020. They recently, this week, actually extended that through May of 2021. So if anybody's on the line that's going to be a second year, 20-month student in the fall, that will impact you in a different way. And we'll be talking, we're still figuring out how to make that look and what that will look like, but we'll be talking about that with you as well too, as we move in through the summer and into the fall term. One of the things that I hope you all are sort of paying attention to is how field and the communities that you're living in, you're working in, you're learning in, how they've been affected by this pandemic. I think we're seeing a variety of different things. Certainly, I think a need for more support around practical services like people getting supplies and prescriptions and groceries and things along that line is an immediate need that's been there for folks. I think what we're also seeing is the emotional effects of this pandemic, the emotional effects of isolation. I teach in the IP realm and have been involved in mental health work for much of my career. And the one thing that I know is that avoidance and withdrawal and isolation are depression and anxiety's friend. And depression and anxiety take advantage of those things. And we're all in those spots right now. So what we're seeing is people that are having significantly more emotional and mental health issues just related to isolation. I think we're seeing more challenges, I think, around domestic violence, family situations where children are feeling stressed and potentially at risk for abuse and things along that line if they've been in those situations before. And I think we need to be mindful. And I think what we're hopefully trying to work with our agencies is to think about how we can support them and you and your work to begin to think about how do we address now the specific needs of the communities that we're all in related to COVID-19. Our world has ultimately changed. And I wonder if people want to add into the chat if there are things specifically that you're seeing in the organizations that you're connected with, or even in your home communities about how communities are responding, how agencies are responding, even how your individual field instructors may be responding. I think probably if folks have things in the chat that you want to offer, please go ahead and maybe Fatima or Aisha, if you can monitor that for me. If there are specific questions, I'd be happy to really address them. I personally feel like what I'm trying to adjust to is that we're in a new world, and it's going to be this way for a while. And even when we're able to get out and do more things, the way we do them is going to be significantly different. And the way that we engage with people and interact is going to be significantly different. And so many of the things that we put in place to address the pandemic, I think, are things that we're going to need to think about. How do we continue them going forward? The one thing for all of you that I would say is likely is that you may be moving into a work world that has a lot more remote and work from home things that we do. If you're in healthcare, or you're in mental health care, or you're providing contacts to clients, I think much more of that will likely take place over telehealth and phone calls and things like Zoom. And so getting used to that. And I think we're thinking about it even from a curriculum perspective in the fall about how do we help you continue to develop those skills. And so one of the things that I hope that you all are doing is even though I think the experience that you're probably getting now is not the one you would have expected. We know that's a common experience in social work anyway. But think about the experiences that you are getting and how they may fit into the new world. And so as you think about even thinking about some way that you might spend time or some assignments that you might do, especially those of you as you get close to graduation, and think about some of the skills that you've learned about engagement in now a different way when you're doing it online, about some of the impacts of Zoom fatigue and fatigue when you're online for a long time. What does that mean about contacting with clients? I think about when you're on the phone, how do you communicate in a way when you can't read nonverbal cues to know how somebody's doing or how they're feeling? Are there new things that you need to be able to think about and engage? And how do you communicate when you're the one that's on the other end of the line too, about what you're experiencing and how you're responding? So thinking about reflective listening is a little bit different, and how we kind of apply it in those situations. So I would encourage all to be mindful of the things that you are learning that I think will be relevant in the world that we're all looking at kind of going forward. And in many ways, I think many of you are at an advantage over people like me that never had to think about it, and all of a sudden we had to. You've been put in a situation where you're having to think about this new way and adjust and really develop skills that I think will be very helpful as we move forward. So that's kind of it for me. I'm happy to address any questions, or if there's discussions, if people want to talk about what they're seeing in their communities, about how the pandemic is affecting the communities you're living and working in. If there are any additional questions, please let me know. Aisha, is there anything in the chat that I should respond to?
Yeah, there's a conversation happening between Joanna, I believe you made a comment or a question, and then Grace also asked a question. Okay. So Joanna, I just unmuted you if you'd like to go ahead and ask that question.
Sure. So I was just curious to see if teletherapy would, for those who have Medicaid, would continue possibly after the stay-at-home order was lifted. Just because at the clinic I'm at in Southwest Detroit, that's currently what they're utilizing. And that's part of the reason why I decided to take field off this summer, was because if this order was lifted, there was an assumption that teletherapy would end. And I'm in California, and so kind of what you were alluding to, it just didn't make sense to come back. So, but now I'm just curious in general for like myself and like other agencies, if anyone has heard anything regarding that.
Yeah, I will say I haven't heard that we won't go back to on-site work, but I think it'll be a combination. I think that one of the things that I suspect, if we really evaluate how some of the telehealth services have looked, is that it's actually improved access for some folks. In other cases, it's made it worse. And so I think we need to have the flexibility to really kind of be able to provide both. So I think about somebody in your situation. If you're in California, for example, let's say the university does end up going to remote teaching again in the fall, you could certainly stay home in California. And my anticipation would be that agencies would be offering both, a combination of people kind of doing things in person and on site. I know the University of Michigan Athletic Department, in their counseling services, are now doing in-person, or they're offering in-person counseling. They're still doing the online and the telehealth, but they've created sort of a process for in-person counseling. Their social distancing is 10 feet, which is, again, something to think about. They have offices big enough to accommodate that. Think of a lot of the agencies that you work in, that social distancing of 6 to 10 feet will be really difficult to accommodate when you think about spaces that are available. So I think there's a lot of things to consider going forward. I don't think I have a clear answer to say, yes, we'll be going back, or no, we won't. My general anticipation would be is that we'll have a combination, and telehealth will continue kind of in different ways for many aspects of care. I don't know if others have thoughts.
Yeah, that was a great question. As far as I know too, just to add to that, the executive order is still in place to expand the use of telemedicine. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about what you're seeing in the community, or how field may change? All right, it doesn't look like it. Again, feel free to write in the chat, and we can do our best to try to answer them later during the call.
Thank you all, and we're greatly appreciative of the feedback that we've gotten from many of you about adjusting to unusual times, and really adjusting to what is not what you all would have expected or field, and not what we would expect either. And our goal very much, and I think one of the things that I'm pleased that CSWE has kind of moved away from such a focus on hours. It's really about learning and learning opportunity, and how can we best help you learn as much as you can from field. So make sure that you're communicating with us if there are things that are happening that you have concerns about, or if you're looking for additional activities. The Engage team and the volunteer opportunities are a great way to supplement. We're finding new things all the time that are kind of coming up, and agencies are even doing some things where they have spots for students to be able to jump in for a few hours here and there as well too. And just to be mindful, one of the things that I've talked about before, we did create a field site within the field office that we're calling COVID-19. So it's a way for us to be able to allow students to continue to accumulate field hours and do remote activities, even if you're not specifically tied to an agency. That we've been able to kind of plug that in. So reach out to us if you feel you're in that boat, and let us kind of know, and continue to be well and stay healthy and stay safe, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to be in the same space together in person sometime soon.
Dan, there's one more question in the chat.
It looks like Joanna has asked. Joanna, let me just go ahead and unmute you.
I can. So, Professor Fisher, you stated that the hour reductions was extended through May 2021. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and it's the same amount of hours as that was reduced for the fall, which is like 750 something more or less hours?
Yeah, what the reduction is it's a 15% reduction of what CSWE has required in the past. With sort of the emergence of people graduating in April when the pandemic hit, and then also for advanced standing students, we made some adjustments. So one of the things that we're still looking at as an office is what's reasonable for people to be able to do in the second year. It gives us a fair amount of flexibility. But Joanna, I think what I'm anticipating will be most likely is that whatever the field hours are that you register for in the fall and winter term as a 20-month student, is that the reduction would be 15% of the hours that normally would have been required. So for example, if you register for 6 credits of advanced field, that would be normally 342 hours of field. And if my math is correct off the top of my head, a 15% reduction of that is about 295, roughly. And so that would be the requirement of the hours that we would look at. So we're trying to go back, as opposed to having it be a total like we were doing with students that were getting ready to graduate, to have it be term by term so people can kind of adjust to that. The nice thing is it gives us and you some flexibility if things sort of escalate with the pandemic over the winter, to be able to think about it in different ways. But that's what I'm envisioning kind of going forward, is that the reduction would really be a 15% reduction per semester that students are involved in field through May of 2021. Does that help answer?
Yeah, that actually kind of sparked a follow-up question, and I might just have to set up an appointment with someone in career services, but do you think the hour reductions is also being implemented in other states, and those requirements regarding how many field hours you need to get your licensure and stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely one that my peers and other institutions, we raised significantly when the hours reduction happened. The majority of states are similar to Michigan, that really licensure is not based on how many hours of field you did during your undergraduate or graduate work. It's really based on whether you graduated from an accredited university. And as long as the school is accredited, which we are, you should be able to apply for licensure. Certainly that's true in Michigan and most other states. New York was one of the exceptions where they really actually looked at undergraduate hours, but they've eliminated that and gone along with CSWE, is my understanding, related to COVID-19. So it shouldn't have an impact for anybody that's applying for licensure, no matter where you're at. But I think that from your standpoint, if you know, for example, you're going to be practicing in California when you leave, it would be good to look at what their state's requirements would be. Michelle Woods in the Career Services Office is really helpful too, and knows probably more than we do in our office about what the state requirements are. My general understanding from my colleagues throughout the country has been that the states have been in concert with CSWE around the reduction in hours during this crisis. So I think you should be okay, even if you do less than we would normally require.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But reach out if you have questions or if you have any concerns, and we'll do our best to try to answer them for you.
Okay, great. I think we're now going to turn it over to Trina, who's going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And it's something I put in the chat. There's going to be a lot of uncertainties probably between now and the fall, and maybe even between now and next year. So as long as these calls are helpful, and I'm sure Dan and his team will continue to put out, information and memos as things change, but we're going to try to provide a forum for people to ask questions and to make sure we're on top of things as well as we can. So thank you, Dan. Thank you to everyone in your field office for all the hard work you're doing. And now I'm going to transition. I have the pleasure or the honor of welcoming Richard Mui to our participants. He is board president of the nonpartisan Asian American Civic Engagement and Voter Rights Organization, Asian Pacific Islander American Vote-Michigan, or APIA-Michigan. And he will be sharing how the work of that organization is being impacted with the COVID pandemic and how Asian American communities are being affected and how students can help. So, and also maybe some volunteer opportunities they have with their organization. So I will now turn it over to Richard Mui, and thank you for joining us today.
I thank you for your invitation to speak. We usually just call it APIAVote-Michigan. It's a mouthful otherwise. No, that's okay. So APIAVote-Michigan, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's really seeking to increase civic engagement by Asian Americans. I think historically Asian Americans are one of the groups that have a low rate of civic participation. The goals fall along a lot of ends. We are trying to increase voter registration. We are trying to ensure voter protection. We do a lot of issue advocacy. So learning to advocate at particularly the state capitol. We have a youth leadership core where we try to develop the youth to help them help us achieve those goals and help themselves along the way. And this year in particular, with 2020, we have done a lot of work with the census, starting all the way actually back in the beginning of the year, and then going forward onward. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Sure. So part of our work is how do we accomplish those things? One of the things that we really seek to achieve here is coalition building. And so we work with other organizations, not only within the Asian American community, because there's a lot of different, so API Vote is kind of an umbrella organization in that sense. There are a lot of the communities have their own organizations. So the Chinese community, the Thai community, Vietnamese community. So trying to work with all those different organizations as well as government agencies, as well as other nonprofits to help us achieve our goals. We also, and so how do we do that? We host a lot of workshops to help educate people on, in particular, like voter protection and voter registration. We usually have an annual legislative day in May. So if you're not aware, May is Asian American Heritage Month. And so usually we have a day where we will go up there and we will have people talk to their legislators. Last year, Governor Whitmer came to speak to the group, and so that was pretty nice. And then we do other things. So this year, if you're not familiar, PBS just released a 5-hour series, or just aired a 5-hour series on Asian Americans. So we were supposed to host actually a series of pre-screenings around here. That wasn't possible, so we ended up participating in a virtual town hall with Detroit Public Television to preview it and help build some interest in that as well. So I can go to the next slide. So I think the COVID-19 impact it's been several things. Obviously, the stay-at-home order for everyone. So with no in-person meeting, that's made it a little bit more challenging, in getting people together. And so we have transitioned to a digital format. So our census workshops became Zoom webinars, essentially, and we've had a series of those. The census pledge cards, we've transitioned those to digital census cards now as well. And so a lot of it is obviously gone to digital. The other challenge of the COVID-19 impact, well, one of the other challenges is the anti-Asian bias. So I don't know if you've been watching the news, and I think more so probably on the West Coast and East Coast, and where there's a greater number of Asian Americans, and in particular if they're taking public transit of sorts. But just the rise in, the language that's coming out of the administration and others. So there's been a real movement, I think, nationally as well as locally here to make people aware of that bias and how the language impacts people's perceptions of Asian Americans as they encounter them. So I think that being said, the impact that's, that we see in us trying to do our work, and this has been mentioned again, I think discussed in the news, is just the COVID-19 has really revealed the disparities that are out there. I'm sure what you guys are aware of. So when we do our webinars and we do the digital outreach, I really feel like we are reaching just probably the middle class section, the people that have internet access, the people that are familiar with, that can adapt to Zoom quickly. So I feel like we've been able to reach those folks, but on the other end of the scale, like, people with lower incomes that don't have regular access and maybe don't have the time, we're still trying to come up with strategies to reach those folks. Additionally, the senior citizens are another challenging group, in particular because they also fall under the not regular access, but sometimes they're living in senior citizen homes or apartment buildings, and it's hard to make contact with them, again, given their vulnerabilities with the age and things like that. So that's been our biggest challenge. One of the other challenges has been the folks that need assistance, whether it's mental health assistance or assistance with food, and just being able to identify those folks. And so we don't have built into our network a way of identifying those people easily. Some of the other organizations do, but not all of them. And so in trying to outreach to identify those families that could use some assistance, and then reach out to them. And then really on a third level is how do we reach out to them? And so we can do wellness calls and checkups. But in terms of food assistance, we've been able to donate some money, but one of our challenges is that our money's earmarked for particular projects. And so it's hard to use that for care packages. So we've tried some fundraising. We've worked with other groups to help provide those care packages. And it's actually pretty nice that one of the organizations, Southeast Community Foundation of Michigan, I think they had a whole system set up where they were packing these up. We would help deliver them. We would help pay for them and deliver them. And so we've worked with other organizations to get those out to folks that need it. So those have been our biggest challenge. And then, coupled on top, well, maybe then layered on top of that is the language barriers. And so I think, in particular, families that are in need or senior citizens that are in need are unfamiliar with the system and how to get help necessarily. And so, again, we've been trying to work with the other ethnic organizations to help identify those folks and then reach out to them. But it's been a slow-going process, to be honest. So in terms of where we could use some assistance, really we could use some assistance with everything. But we are making a big push right now still with the census to make sure everybody gets counted. And then I think that's the other challenge too is, sorry if I can interject, when we had workshops, it was easier to get people to come to some degree because you could, you show up for an hour, you bring a friend and things like that. I think one of the other challenging demographics is just probably like a middle-class second generation demographic where they're aware and they're not necessarily impacted directly by the COVID-19 or even, feel like census work or voting. They might do those things, but they don't see themselves as part of the solution either. So reaching out to those people has been a challenge. So we have been pushing with the census. We do some phone banking. We work with state voices. So we do phone banking with state voices with their list. We've been doing a lot of text banking as well. Other areas where we could use some help is just networking within language. And so if you have a network of where that people might need some assistance, we can collaborate and help get those people some assistance. On a more just basic level, just help maintaining our social media work in terms of connecting folks that need help. Again, connecting other organizations that are doing things to make sure we're not replicating the work that it's already being done, but maybe how to augment that. And then just our newsletter as well. So we need to make sure that our supporters are aware of what we're doing, and again, they can share with other folks. So I gotta say, I'm a high school teacher by trade, and I still find it a little bit strange where it's like I'm just doing all the talking. There's no like feedback, and it's hard to read the facial expressions of the people that have their cameras on. So that's my bit about API Vote Michigan. I guess if you have questions, are there any questions that you have about us or about the work that we do, or how you can help out?
I have some questions. Let me just I have some questions, Richard. I've worked with your guys' organization for a while. Mm-hmm. And could you just talk a little bit more about why, like, helping out with the census is so important, especially during a pandemic, and just for people who don't have a lot of awareness of. Okay,
thank you. Yeah, so the census, and part of the explanation is that's how they determine, in part, how they determine the allocation of federal money. And so money for hospitals, money for schools, roads, Medicaid, SNAP program. And so depending on how many people they think live there will impact the money that's allocated. And the number they give roughly is $1,800 per person per year. So you're talking someone that doesn't get counted, over 10 years, you're costing your area $18,000, even though, you will live there and take, and use the resources, but the population is not being funded sufficiently. And that's not even saying, so I said on one webinar, professor at Wayne State, and said, even given Detroit and they get Title I money for education and things like that, that $1,800 figure is even higher. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is that's how they will distribute the seats in the House of Representatives. And so Michigan has been losing seats over the last several decades. And I think the state, their estimate is we need to get to about an 82% response rate. Otherwise, we're going to lose another seat. And just, that if you have no voice in Congress, then, you're less apt to be heard and less apt to get resources. So really it is, and I think getting people to understand that. So one of the taglines is it's 10 minutes for 10 years. To make sure that especially for Asian Americans, that they're counted accurately. Again, so when businesses decide to open up, they in part look at the census data, and again, even for the state in terms of where they're spreading the money around the state, it depends on that, and they need an accurate count to obviously do that properly. So it sounds tawdry a bit, but it's about the money, it's about representation, and making sure that your voice is heard.
Trina, I believe that you have a follow-up question. She wants to know, has Michigan been undercounted in the past, and is it more of an issue with the API community? Michigan, I think, has been undercounted in the past, and that, no one's at 100%, obviously, but Michigan has been. Census is actually pretty neat. You can look up census response rate, so you can look it up by state. I think right now we're number 4 in the nation. Census response rate, and then you can even drill down to the cities and townships. So I know, like Sterling Heights, we did a workshop with them, and one of their commissioners was on, and they've done a lot of outreach. They were at 80% response rate. I live in Farmington Hills. I think we're like 69% response rate. And so in terms of Asian Americans, typically are one of the groups that are undercounted, but it's rural areas, low income areas, group housing areas. Those, I think, historically have been the places that have been undercounted. And so in particular, what makes it really challenging now during COVID-19 is reaching out to a lower income area where they don't necessarily respond to text or phone calls, things like that. I think a lot of people right now, when you get some unknown number on your phone, you just don't tend to answer. And so if they're not already part of some network, they might not be reached. And then the follow-up responders are going to be delayed right now. I mean, I think the plan is July. They'll start coming out to do follow-ups for people that haven't responded. So. Right, and they have until the end of August.
End of August, yes. I want to say I think they stretched that out. They've been pushing back because they were supposed to have the report done by December 31st. I want to say they pushed it back maybe. But that's something, you know, there's something the Census Bureau is keeping an eye on, and I think everybody's keeping an eye on, because it's not a scramble for money, but you need to make sure you're counted.
Right. So I know that you guys have about 3 of our social work students. How are they helping, and what could our students do if they're interested in helping with something like the census?
So one of the things that we did, and it's really just numbers wise, and so Rebeka Islam, our executive director, has been working with the students more, so I can't speak as much to what they're doing with her. I know we need help with the phone banking and text banking. For one, it's not glamorous work, but that's the grunt work I think that every organization needs to get done to help fulfill its mission. To this point, we text banked I think 22,000 numbers, but there are like thousands more. And actually, the response rate with text banking has been a lot better. Our phone banking, we've called several thousand phone numbers as well. The response rate tends to be lower. So I think that on a practical matter, if they are working with a network here in Michigan, that we could help provide a seminar or a webinar, again, to help explain to community members of the importance of completing the census. And right now we're kind of in a weird spot, because I think the people that are aware have already completed it. And the people that aren't aware won't necessarily be the ones to join a Zoom webinar. And so that's really, I think we're at a stage where we need people with like a contact, where somebody that's telling you, yeah, it's worth your time, you can come. We've tried to incentivize it even by raffling off a couple gift cards at the end of it, just to get people to come. So yeah, if they're working with a community that could benefit from a webinar on the census, it's not very long, it's 30 to 40 minutes, and then if there's questions afterwards. But just as to the why, occasionally when we do the text bank, we'll still get a why. Why do I need to fill this out? It's not important, or they're not aware of who needs to fill it out. So they think, well, I'm not a citizen, I don't need to, or even if they don't have documentation, they don't need to, or they're afraid to. And so there's a lot of fear and misperceptions surrounding those, and we try to help clear those up in the webinars.
Do you have any infographics already made that we could share with our networks? I'm thinking about my internship in Southwest Detroit and connecting with the youth and making sure their families have completed the census and that they're included in all of this.
Yes. So in English or in other languages, or both?
Both.
Okay. Yeah, we do. So we actually, there's a national organization, a national network that's been great about producing infographics and documents in language. So there's in English, there is in a number of, if you have a specific Asian language you need, I can send that. I think they have it even for Spanish. So, yeah. So I don't know, maybe, well, I don't know what's the best way to connect in terms of getting that to you.
Yeah, I think that you can, if the student wants to email the Engage team, one of us, we can get them in touch with you. And I believe the next slide, Fatima, has your contact information. So if students want to also contact you directly or learn more about the organization.
Yeah.
Can I put my email in the chat? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. And so you guys are doing the census outreach to not just Asian American populations, although you're primarily focusing on them, correct?
Yeah, we've done so. Like when we did a webinar with City of Sterling Heights, the Good Governance, Filipinos for Good Governance organization. So yeah, we can do it with other organizations as well.
So we have a question from Tom Land. Let me go ahead and unmute Tom.
Oh, hi. Just a quick question. How do you plan to engage these families or these populations, these API populations that are struggling, are not well off? Sorry, I have my kid with me, so.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so that's part of it is, we need to identify, and then, there's other organizations, and we did a a bit with them in terms of getting them care packages, and specifically care packages that reflected their an Asian diet. And so that's, there's some different foods, some different materials that would come in there that would reflect their diet. But honestly, that is part of the challenge. So that has been part of the challenge. And so I know one organization like the Association of Chinese Americans, they, I think, have a pretty good list of seniors that they work with. So they do, they take seniors on field trips throughout the year, and that's been part of their outreach throughout the years. And so they're easily able to translate that list into just calls. My father-in-law and mother-in-law got a call from that organization. Unfortunately, we don't have anything broken down like that. And so we've been trying to, again, work through other organizations to see if they have a list where we can be of assistance and help support them.
Gotcha. That helps, because I too am struggling with engaging that particular population from my previous job. So good to know. I just thought I can pick your brain about it.
Okay. No, if you have any suggestions, that'd be great. Great to hear also.
Yeah, I'll probably share my email and be a part of this engagement team as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions anyone else wants to ask? And again, feel free to reach out to Richard. Here's his contact information, or us, and we can help put you in touch. I think that, one of the things, Richard, that I learned while working with your organization is that the model minority myth is a myth, and that we have high rates of poverty among Indian Americans and Chinese Americans, around 20% in Michigan. And these people need to fill out the census, and everyone needs to fill out the census.
Yeah, I really, the model minority myth obscures, I think, the overall demographic. And so,
the inequities. Well, thank you so much again for joining us.
Okay, thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. Okay, back to Trina.
Oh, well, thank you, Richard. Thank you for everyone who participated. Next slide, Fatima. Now I have the pleasure of introducing two of our students. Many of you probably already know them, but I will introduce them for those who don't. Two of our Asian American students are going to have a chance to kind of talk about their experiences during the pandemic and how it's been impacting their practice as social workers, and then we'll open it up for a larger discussion. So first we have Susan Wu. She's an MSW candidate for 2020. She's with the Management of Human Services and practice minor of Social Policy and Evaluation, concentration Children, Youth, and Families. And so I guess I'll introduce them both, but I guess Susan will go first and then Lavella. Lavella is an MSW candidate from May of 2021. She's in interpersonal practice and mental health. So now I will pass it over to you, Susan, and then Lavella, you can follow.
Hi, thank you for having me. Should I just respond to the questions that were sent?
Yeah, actually, if Fatima, if you can navigate to the next slide. So we have some questions that it would be great if you both could answer. And then we want to open it up to kind of a larger discussion about how identity, various identities, impacts your experience of the pandemic, your family's experience, your community's experience. So why don't we start with you guys just answering these questions, and then we can go from there and hear from more people.
Okay. So I've been impacted because I don't know, I guess just having fear and worry that if I go out in public, something will happen to me. But fortunately, nothing has happened. I haven't received any verbal abuse or assault. But that just concerns me for other people. So as part of the API coalition, we wrote a letter addressing the School of Social Work, just to raise awareness to the community. So I can post that links because there are references in it, and it talks about how we can be a bystander. How we cannot be a bystander, and what actions we can take to help, and then also like reporting any incidents or hate crimes. So I posted that link with the letter, and the purpose was just to encourage people to act against any discrimination that Asian Americans face, and helping each other unite with the international community, and getting support from any allies. For the second question, how has it impacted the API community? So there has been a lot of reported incidents to the Stop AAPI Hate. And so as of May 4th, there were almost 2,000 incidents that were reported, and women are more likely to receive any incidents. Sorry. And I think it's just, it's been challenging for our community because there are people who are being attacked, physically assaulted, or maybe shunned in public places, facing discrimination at work, or receiving abuse online. And it's just because of our race, and it's just been difficult for us. And it's just because maybe some people aren't aware or knowledgeable about the coronavirus. And then for the third question, for me, I've just been more mindful of the clients who may be lacking resources because of the coronavirus. So, you know, trying to help out at my internship by creating more policies and ways to have more resources, such as food drives, or thinking of ways they can receive teletherapy. So that's from me.
Hey y'all, my name is Lavella. I personally, like Susan said, haven't been impacted and discriminated against, which I'm grateful for, but obviously it is happening, which is part of the reason that we, API Coalition, wrote the letter, and also are sort of shifting into trying to figure out how we can be involved and support people and what's going on, and how to, just increase support for folks. I think one of the things for me, thinking about sort of our community, obviously I have a lot of family in the Philippines, family and friends there, and a lot of, Asian countries are developing countries. And so I'm thinking not necessarily just about the discrimination, but about the impact of so many Asians who are dealing with the pandemic in terms of living in poverty, and then it being exacerbated because they maybe their only job is to sell cigarettes on the street, and since they can't go out, they're even more marginalized because they can't get access to money. And then I was talking to one of my friends about her sister actually is a doctor, and her sister is very stressed out because of what's happening and everything that she's dealing with, and the fact that they're not taking time off, they're not getting tested, but also so many people. She said the other day to me, she said people go to the hospital to die, that it's kind of the last resort, because when they go there, they know that there's going to be these obscene bills that a lot of people just won't go because they can't afford to pay what it's going to cost them to pay to be treated there. I also have, I lived in Philly for a long time, and I've been in touch with some friends in Philly who've talked about being on public transit and being harassed, or seeing people being harassed, or being afraid to ride public transit because of what's happened in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia does have a Chinatown, and there's been a lot of graffiti and also just a lot of places having to close down because they can't afford to stay open, and because of the the violence and the graffiti and the discrimination that's happened. In terms of my work and practice as a social worker, I think Asian Americans already, like a lot of cultures, there's a stigma around mental health issues, and I think because Asian Americans and Asians in general are being discriminated against right now, it's exacerbating, but there's not necessarily a change in that stigma. And so I think that's something we really need to think about and try to sort of normalize the need for that support and create that support specifically for Asian Americans dealing with this kind of stuff. But I haven't necessarily gotten at doing that. But I know that Tom and Sabrina and some other folks are on, so I don't want to take more time. I'd love to hear from other folks if that's what we're doing next. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, I know that many people from the API Coalition and the API Anti-Hate Task Force have joined, and we want to hear about your guys' experiences as well and how you're combating this issue. So if anyone would like to talk, why don't you put it in the chat, and then I can unmute you. Sure, Tom, I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, actually I have two stories here. One I can remember was at Costco here in Ann Arbor. We know this is not a place that's you know, you don't usually see a lot of racism or whatnot going on. But then here in Ann Arbor at the Costco here, while I was filling up gas, this one Asian gentleman, he was filling up gas on the other side of the car or wherever the that petrol station thing is. And a guy just all of a sudden comes by, honked at him and hit him, and he took off. So I ran over to this gentleman. He's he looks probably Japanese or Korean. I don't even know. I walked up to him. I'm like, "Hey, are you okay?" All he says, just forget about it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Just forget it. Walk away. Go. Get away. I'm like, "You serious? Are you okay?" He says, "Just forget about it." I'm like, he was angry. You could clearly see that he was pissed off or upset. So I went up to the one of those Costco attendants, and I told him about what happened. I told him, "Hey, did you just see that? Are you going to report it?" He says, "You know what? That's nothing. That's okay, man. I've seen worse." I'm like, "You're seriously just letting this thing go?" And this is about a month ago. And I'm like, wow, but it didn't happen to me. I try to stand up against this. And that's why I'm kind of passionate about things that are happening. A lot of people in our community are not talking about or not confronting it, you know, and letting it slide. And the other thing was, this is actually in our social work program. I don't want to specifically, you know what? I'll have to do it. I'm part of this cohort, and this small cohort, and we had this meeting, and I shared my piece about, you know, API hate and all the xenophobic experiences that are going on. And this one colleague or peer of mine, from my cohort, was casually, makes me feel discredited because of what she said. She just basically said, "You know what you guys are experiencing, Asians are barely experiencing what we have been experiencing for centuries." I'm not trying to compare. I don't want her to compare, but I want her to know that this is happening, and racism is racism. Discrimination is discrimination. Doesn't matter what color. It's just not right. I don't want, and what's unfortunate and what bothers me most is because this person is going to be a social worker. I don't want her to come in to the field with a narrow lens and just focusing on a certain population. That injustice is across the board for all races, and it shouldn't matter who or what, Latino, Black, Asian, whatever. It shouldn't be right. That's all I wanted to share with this person, and I don't know how to approach her. But anyways, that's something I've experienced recently, last week or 2 weeks ago, that people are just was discrediting what Asians are experiencing right now.
Thanks for sharing that, Tom. And I think that this is a bigger discussion that hopefully the school can also integrate in some of their anti-racist kind of work with students. Because there should never be a competition. You're absolutely right. But I think it's also, we have to acknowledge the kind of historic discrimination that some populations have faced. And we all know as social workers, it's not new to us that the communities that we tend to work with usually face discrimination, racial discrimination. And I think we really should think about how do we combat it, right? I know in the anti-hate groups that I'm in, we talk a lot about calling it out when you see it, reporting it, and trying to share and educate people to combat misinformation. Because there's a lot of stuff right now where people think that, coming in contact with someone who's East Asian will give them coronavirus, for example. How do you share that? So I think knowledge and sharing information is another way to combat it. What are some other, other ways that people on the line, on the call, combat this when they see it? And it doesn't have to just be Asian American specific in regards to your identity.
Hi, everyone. I know for me, when I've witnessed injustice or discrimination of some sorts or experienced it for myself, I've always tried to combat it by just directly pointing it out, acknowledging that someone is acting some type of way or speaking type of way to me because of my identity and compared to their identities. So I think it's very important to point that out. And I also think it's very important for us to have conversations. I'm really proud of a lot of my peers and a lot of people that I see on my social media platforms who have been hosting discussions and conversations around a lot of new forms of hatred that's being spread by everyone being so virtual and online. It does give people an opportunity to have that online confidence to say things that they wouldn't say to you in a classroom or to your face. So I know that's something that I'm very cautious about with this virtual transition in our online classes of the things that people might say because they are protected by their screen, or they can kind of say something and disengage, and not you really can't gauge the full extent of progress you're making in that conversation with that person. So it's very, very difficult. And Tom, I know we've had conversations about this in our dialogue sessions, and it's just so complex, so complex.
Yeah, I wish we had some discussions before this whole pandemic happened, Tom. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of your group. That was awesome.
Thanks so much for sharing. And I think you're absolutely right, Jamie. How important is it we want to denormalize, right? When people discriminate, a part of them feels like it's going to be accepted and they're going to get away with it. But when you call it out and you shame them, it helps that sort of behavior to not be normalized. So I think that was a really important point. And we have to normalize discussions like this, right? Because the burden shouldn't be on us. How about anyone else? Does anyone else want to share? Just even how your identity, you feel, is impacting the way you're experiencing this pandemic.
I can share a couple of things. This is Dominique. So I think that part of what my activism has always started is at home and with friends. So I really like taking the each one reach one approach. So just making sure people close to me are not passing on anything that's ignorant. And so I've been doing that since probably the second grade. So my family is pretty used to it with me. Friends are pretty used to it. And then similar to what Jamie said, sharing things on social media and also asking people why. That makes them really uncomfortable. So I try to have a little bit of empathy where people are in their learning journey, which is really hard. But I personally try to stay away from shaming because I don't want people to lock up and not be able to ever hear anything from me again. So that's been my approach. And then just something that I'm always thinking about, my parents moved out of Detroit about 8 years ago. And just being one of the few Black families in our neighborhood has been an issue since we got there. And so just making sure we have our ID on us when we're going out for walks as a family, because people, have asked, what are you doing out here and things like that. And also, once it came out that a lot of Black Americans were dying, and I've had family members who have passed away from COVID. I have a little cousin right now who's 9, who's currently in the hospital, who thankfully got over organ failure. But, once it came out that a lot of Black Americans were dying from this disease, there was there's been a lot of nasty things happening in the community because of that as well. So just making sure to support all of the people who are being targeted because of this, and also just spreading truthful information. And this also goes into my part, taking care of ourselves. So it might seem weird or wild to people that I only go to the grocery store twice a month, but I try to be safe and stay away because this virus has taken out people in my family and who are close to me. So yeah, those are some of my experiences and perspectives. Thank you all.
That was great, Dominique. Thank you for sharing that. Could you expand a little bit on what did you call it? You said like share one, do one or something? I'm sorry.
Oh, each one, reach one. So if I can impact even just one person with my experiences or my words, the hope is that they touch someone else and that it just keeps going as a ripple effect.
Right.
Sometimes I know, especially when I was younger, I'd want to do everything big, big, big. And so part of my growth as a social justice warrior has been being okay with the small win.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share anything? Well, thank you all for joining this discussion. I think this was really great, and it's powerful and it's important.
Aisha,
Oh, yeah.
I just pointing out that Trina wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I could just take over now. I was just going to say the one other thing that hasn't been mentioned, or maybe I missed it, is that there's the PBS special on Asian Americans in the United States and what's been happening and discrimination and I think that might be good to watch. There was a conversation at the University of Michigan this past Friday, and I guess I lost my train of thought a little bit, but one thought I had is that I was telling this to a friend of mine who I've worked with for long times on kind of national multi-ethnic, multiracial coalitions. And she said that when she grew up in Ann Arbor in the 60s, she was the only Asian, her family and one exchange student were the only Asian American families in Ann Arbor, which is weird now because the numbers are larger. But she said just how isolated she felt and how horrible things were in the late 60s, early 70s. And so there's waves and flows and ebbs and flows and things change. So things change at the local level and in very specific neighborhoods and communities, and things change nationally as demographics change, as situations change. So I think one, when possible, connecting to some of these multi-ethnic, multiracial organizations so that you can kind of be aware not just what you're seeing in front of you, but kind of the larger picture. And then I think going back to what Dominique says, if you hear things in people you do come in contact with or your family or online, as well as you can to try to promote truth and facts and statistics as opposed to allowing untruths and myths to perpetuate. So that is all I have. If there's no other questions or comments, we're going to transition to the next slide, which I think is Dominique and self-care. Very good. So you've already heard from Dominique a little bit, but she just graduated from the MSW program and is now working with our Engage team, as well as on some other things that I'm doing at the School of Social Work. And she has been gracious enough to offer a few minutes of advice on self-care and some tips. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Dominique.
Hello again. We can go to the next slide. So thank you all for having me. I like to try to keep it experiential. So one of the things that I'd like to ask everyone to do is to maybe take about a minute to think about 3 things that you're grateful for. And you can write them down on your computer. This is without the chat right now, so keeping it very personal to you. 3 things that you're grateful for, and then I'll move into the pictures and the hyperlinks that I have. So maybe a minute and a half to just think about a few things, 3 things that you're grateful for. And as you're wrapping up your list, for those who are comfortable sharing, if you could put just one thing, if you're comfortable, in the chat to share with the group. So we have the rain, my health, inspiring students and colleagues, the team that I work with, my family's health. Oh, a lot coming in at once. A strong spiritual community, my family's health, good friends, my cat. Awesome. So it's good to see that people didn't try to go too grandiose. Their gratitude list can be really simple. So mine included Catfish, the TV show. I really love that show. You get to really get into the minds of people, and I miss doing some of my IP work sometimes. So I'm always thinking, what made this person want to lie about their identity? You know, things like that. So it can be nice and simple. But I didn't want to stop at the gratitude list. So you'll see that I added some photos on the slide. The first one says happiness is an emotion, not a destination. So a lot of times gratitude, we know that practicing gratitude is very helpful to combat those automatic negative thoughts. And sometimes people can use avoidance or use constant positivity to avoid the emotions that don't feel so good. So I wanted to make sure if I'm offering up something that's helpful, like a gratitude list, I'm reminding people, you don't have to be happy all the time. The second picture says true happiness isn't the act of choosing to be happy. It's the art and allowance of accepting human emotions, observing them, and being okay with them being a part of our lives. So if I'm irritated, I dig into that feeling, and that goes into the bump it list. So the author, Sarah Steckler, of the site that I got this information from, was talking about not falling into the trap of avoidance by trying to drown negative thoughts in constant positivity. So the bump it list is where you could list out the things that are really bothering you, things that you can't seem to get unangry about, things you wish you could change with no apologies, no worry or feeling guilty about these negative thoughts, just letting it all out. And then for the things that you're accepting of, you can't really do anything of in this specific moment, you cross it out and you let it go after acknowledging that that's something that is bothering you. And then after that, you highlight the things that are still really bugging you. And at the end of all of that, make a sub list of the things that you can actually take action on or do better on. And that helps put one back in the state of empowerment. So if I have these 3 things that are really bothering me, what can I do about it? It can give one power and choice and decisiveness, which can reduce feelings of feeling overwhelmed. And it shows one what is possible and takes away most feelings of defeat and helplessness. So the last picture shows that it's a lot easier to be happier when you realize you don't have to be happy all of the time. So the gratitude lists have been really helpful for me in the past, and it's something that I shared with clients when I was in my field placement. And I always like to remind people, it doesn't mean that there's nothing that goes wrong, but it can definitely be helpful in combating those automatic negative thoughts. So hopefully some of the things that we've shared during the self-care portion have been helpful for you or people close to you. So those are things like the 5 senses, the box breathing and things like that. And I'll continue to try to share things that are really quick that you can do if you're on the go or if you're at home or at the end of the night when you're on your way to bed. So thank you all for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Dominique. We appreciate you and all your self-care tips. Okay, so I am winding down now. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Jamie Simmons is our new field intern and has been very, very helpful in getting this particular session up. And then if it runs any smoother this time around, we can thank her for being part of the team. And then for those of you who have not been on before, the volunteer opportunity list, the link is here, and it's also on the COVID link at the school webpage and our community engagement webpage. If you've done one of these volunteer opportunities, please fill out the volunteer form so that we can know kind of how many people are getting engaged and where they're going. We also have an archive of everything we've done so far. So this is session number 5. The first 2 sessions, we don't have the recording of Deepa Iyer, but we have her slides. And then last session and this session will all be on this archive if you want to go back and look at it or hear some parts of it again. As Dan has said, and we're thankful for, you get field credit just for attending these sessions. So please make sure you note these and put that on your field hours. You do have to get permission from your field faculty if you're doing these volunteer opportunities, but know that you can get credit for these things. I also want to make sure people are aware there's not going to be a session next week, so we're skipping next Thursday, but on 2 weeks from now, on May 28th, we're going to have another session. So Jamila Martin of Movement Vote and leading the My COVID community is going to be here. And Common Roots is going to join us. We're going to have further conversation on the impact of pandemic on racial and economic equity. And so hopefully you'll join us in 2 weeks. So thank you very much. Again, if you don't know how to get any of this, you have questions, you can just email me or the Engage social work team. But we appreciate your participation today and we look forward to next time. Thank you very much.